Okay, good to go. Hi all, and welcome to our discussion, our team debate for the 619 course. The topic we will be discussing today is FBA, Functional Behavioral Assessment, versus FA, Functional Analysis. I would like to start out by introducing our debate team. I am Amanda, and I will be acting as the moderator during our debate. Rachel, Tricia, and John will be speaking on functional assessment or analysis, while Jalen and Hannah will be speaking on functional behavioral assessments. The rules of our debate are that each person speaks one at a time, no one interrupts another person while they are speaking, and that all individuals keep a professional attitude throughout the debate. As the moderator, I will give a visual cue of a yellow card when there's 1 minute left to speak, and then I will give a visual cue of a red card when the person's time is up. Once the person's time is up, they will be expected to finish their statement and give the floor over to the next person. Before we begin, I would like to give some brief information about both FAs and FBAs. According to the Cooper text, an FBA can be defined as a systematic method of assessment for obtaining information about the purposes a problem behavior serves for a person, while an FA is defined as an analysis where antecedents and consequences similar to those in the person's natural environment are recreated within an experimental setting with the purpose of observation and measurement. Experimental functional analysis is thought to be the gold standard. However, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act required that formal functional behavioral assessments be used to address behavior issues within the school system. There are arguments that experimental FAs are essential in developing treatment interventions, while others believe that a less expensive and less intrusive approach may conclude the same results. We are going to address both sides of the claims within our debate and give some valuable insight within research and what it has to say. With all of that being said, I would like to now hand the mic over to Tricia.
Thank you. So functional analysis is grounded in the applied behavior analysis principle that posits that problem behavior is functionally related to the environment in which it occurs, and it is maintained by either providing access to reinforcing outcomes or allowing the individual to avoid or escape that which they find aversive. Functional analysis documents causal relations between problem behavior and environmental variables. During a functional analysis, there is direct observation of the behavior and the manipulation of some environmental event. Some environmental event is used, and the environment is systematically altered while problem behavior is being observed. Literature on functional analysis includes a number of procedural variations, all involving manipulation of antecedents and consequences that effectively identify behavioral function in a majority of cases. Because functional analysis reveals causal relationships between problem behavior and environmental variables, it offers a greater confidence in the intervention decisions.
I'm going to start off by defining and determining the importance of a functional behavior assessment. According to Cooper, Heron, and Hayward, behavioral assessment involves a variety of methods, including direct observations, interviews, checklists, and tests to identify and define targets for behavior change. Behavioral assessments are an essential part of determining an effective treatment to decrease problem behavior. Functional behavioral assessments also allow us to understand why the client is engaging in a behavior before determining how to treat the behavior. This concept is in accordance with the BACB Compliance Code 2.0, Behavior Analyst Responsibility to Clients, and 2.09, Treatment Intervention Efficacy.
Okay, I'm going to be starting off with what an experimental functional analysis is. And according to Bader, Wolf, and Risley, functional analysis means any empirical demonstration of a cause-effect relation. This means that functional analysis involves the direct manipulation of antecedent and or consequence events. This allows one to reliably ascertain the functional relationship between behavior and environment, Tarbox and colleague. So finding the function of behavior before implementing a behavior intervention plan has become the professional standard of practice and is mandated in many cases. Knowing the function of behavior allows you to make changes to challenging behaviors. So here are the variations of functional analysis. You have the full FA, which is the standard FA, brief functional analysis, BFA, single function test, alone series, precursor function, latency function, and trial-based. For a full FA, generally, you would isolate some environmental event in a test condition and expose behavior to it and see what happens. You have your test conditions and control condition. So you have 4 conditions total. Each condition lasts 15 minutes. So Dr. Brian Awada came up with the functional analysis protocol. Here you see the 4 conditions: attention, demand, alone, and play. Each condition is followed by a discriminative stimulus, and the EO, the antecedent, and the consequence. So for the attention, therapist 1 would ignore the client, and he or she would only give attention if the client exhibits problem behavior. For the second condition, it's a different therapist, a different room, and they're working on demand. So a therapist will present a learning trial, and a timeout would be given if the behavior problem shows itself, and that would be escape from work demands. The third condition is alone, so that there's no stimulation, no therapist, and they're looking for automatic reinforcement. The last condition is the play condition. It's control. So attention is given freely, there are no demands, and there are a lot of toys. So you would expect in the control condition that there will be less problem behavior relative to the other conditions. For brief functional analysis, the protocol is quite similar to a functional analysis. The main difference is it's just a lot shorter, as you might have guessed from the name. Looking at graph D, for brief functional analysis, you see that each point represents a condition. You have your attention, demand, alone, and play. And you can see right here that attention has the highest occurrence of behavior problem. So the problem behavior is being maintained by attention. Next, you have the single function test. It's when a hypothesis has been generated by other sources. Anecdotal report, for example, that strongly suggests a function. So then you could just use this test. And for this one right here, for graph E, you see the demand and play condition. The demand is the triangle shape, and you see that there's more problem behavior in that condition. So in that case, you can just go straight to an intervention, and you'll just come back to the test if the intervention is ineffective. This is called the alone series. This is for automatic reinforcement. You have repeated alone sessions, and there are no test control comparisons. However, due to the absence of all social stimulation, it is easy to verify the problem behavior continuing despite the absence. So the authors did mention that the repeated sessions for the decrease in target behavior, it could be due to extinction. So they did recommend in the next test or whatever study that they have test contingency conditions like for attention and things like that. These next 2 conditions or FAs are precursor and latency. They both deal with problem behaviors, so like aggression, self-injurious behavior. And for precursor, Awada and colleagues, they did an FA on behaviors that showed itself before the problem behavior. So you can do an FA on the precursor behavior to reduce risk to caregivers or educators. Latency, you just determine you measure the time between the SD and the behavior of the showing of the target behavior. And right when the problem behavior occurs, you terminate the session, and you end if no problem behavior has occurred. So trial-based is you just embed assessment probes into a kiddo's routine in school. So for the example, demand probe, 1 to 2 minutes of no work, followed by EO work demands for 1 to 2 minutes, and remove the problem behavior occurs. Here's a nice little chart by Dr. Brian Awada.
All right. A functional behavior assessment focuses on isolating the 4 different functions, just like a functional analysis does. Attention, escape, access to tangibles, and self-stimulatory behavior. And it determines which of those functions are increasing or maintaining the occurrences of a targeted behavior. Research has demonstrated that by performing an FBA and identifying that function, we can alter the environment to withhold reinforcement, which will result in a decrease in that targeted behavior. As research continued to support the FBA, schools began adopting the practice of performing them, which required that a behavior intervention plan or positive behavioral support go alongside that FBA to target problem behavior reduction due to a mandate in 1997 by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Prior to this mandate, behavior analysts concluded that an FBA was best practice, but because of the mandate, it became a federal law to have a behavior intervention plan alongside an FBA in the school setting. There are two methods that can be used when completing an FBA. There's the indirect method and the direct method. The indirect FBA involves assessing a behavior removed from the time and place it occurred, which means looking back at historical records, interviews, and rating scales. But direct observation is used to confirm the information obtained from the indirect method, and it's typically done by collecting ABC data. Collecting ABC data can lead to hypothesizing the potential function of a targeted behavior by analyzing what occurs immediately before and immediately after the behavior. Direct observation can also include observing the frequency, latency, inner response time, intensity, and permanent products of that targeted behavior. Once data has been collected through the methods I just described, the information can be summarized to form a hypothesis, which will help in constructing a competing behaviors pathway, as well as developing an intervention plan. By developing an intervention plan, the researcher can begin focusing on changing the antecedent event that will likely occur before the behavior, and by changing the way the consequence events are delivered, and identifying appropriate replacement skills that still serve the same function as the targeted behavior, but are more socially appropriate.
So as stated before, we need to know the function of a behavior before we implement behavior reduction plan. So as stated before, here are the functions of behavior, and I'm just going to quickly go over that. So maybe the child wants attention, maybe they want attention from a teacher, a peer, or a parent. They may want access to a tangible item such as an iPad, computer, or something that's super reinforcing, maybe a cell phone. Maybe they're going to or trying to escape from a demand put on them. Maybe they want to be alone because they don't feel good, or maybe they just want to play. So both functional assessment and functional analysis attempt to answer 4 questions. Is there a pattern of events or behaviors that consistently happen before or after the occurrence of the problem behavior? So for those, we will take ABC data and look at that. Can the student be taught an alternative behavior that is appropriate, that can serve the same function as an inappropriate behavior? So for example, if a child is screaming at their parent because they want food, we would put an appropriate behavior such as demanding or asking. And also, what setting did the behavior occur in? Did it happen at home, at school, at the playground? Also, you want to think about if the child is self-injurious, where the behavior happened on their body. Did they hit their head with their hands, or did they bite their arm? So why is functional analysis used? There's 4 reasons. We want to confirm or improve a hypothesis from a functional assessment, or to clarify uncertain results from the functional assessment, or it can serve as the initial step in the development of a hypothesis. Why don't we use functional assessments only? So from the article Baer, Wolf, and Risley, 1968, they mentioned the dimensions of applied behavior analysis. They go over 7 dimensions, and as you can see in number 2 under behavioral, it uses measurable data and or descriptive report, but we have to use measurable data. And all of these dimensions entwine together, and they are based upon each other. In the BCBA Code of Ethics, it states that we rely on scientific knowledge and a recording of data. We have to obtain, record, graphically display the data to allow for decision making and recommendations for a behavior change program. The Code of Ethics also states that we must conduct research competently with concern for participants' welfare. So by the graph, you should be able to tell whether the implementation plan is effective or harmful for the child. We also want to plan the research to minimize misleading results, and we'll be able to do that as long as we collect data.
Okay, so typically conducting an FBA includes a functional assessment interview, problem behavior questionnaire, and a direct observation after that. The functional assessment interview has 4 goals, and those are to identify and define target behaviors, identify the antecedent events associated with that behavior, create a hypothesis as to the function of that behavior, and to identify an appropriate replacement skill. The problem behavior questionnaire is about a 15-item rating scale that the caretakers of the individual fill out that rate the likelihood of a specified problem behavior occurring and help create a hypothesis in regards to the function of that behavior. The direct observation recording is what I mentioned earlier, which is ABC data collection typically. There have been studies that focus on comparing the degree to which the hypothesis determined during an FBA would be confirmed through the manipulation during the functional analysis. The results of one of that study, the Lewis article, showed that for the majority of participants, the hypothesis created through the FBA lined up with the hypothesis that was confirmed through the functional analysis. Both FBAs and FAs have been conducted in a school setting. However, because the functional analysis involves the direct manipulation of a variable, it is essential that a FBA be conducted before any manipulation occurs to correctly identify a functional relationship between a maintaining reinforcer and a targeted behavior. Another drawback to performing an FA in a school setting is the lack of personnel with training to perform the FA, the time it takes to perform the FA, as well as the need for a second observer to collect data as well as observe those behaviors. Because of these drawbacks, FBAs are typically picked over an FA because it includes both direct and indirect measurements to assess behavior. To go alongside of this, FBAs do not include the direct manipulation of a variable, whereas FAs do.
So close-ended indirect assessments, like the questions about behavior function and motivational assessment scale, are notoriously unreliable. When 2 people who have a history with a person engaging in problem behavior are asked to complete the rating scale, the analysis of their response usually yield different behavioral functions, proving these tests unreliable. Without reliability, there is no validity, meaning that there is no opportunity to determine whether the function of the behavior is correct from these assessments. Behavior assessments are also unreliable for determining behavior function. Hanley states that descriptive assessments are notoriously invalid for detecting behavioral function and often result in positive outcomes regarding attention and likely produces false negatives in the function of escape. In 2007, Cunningham and O'Neill examined the degree to which traditional indirect FBA hypotheses were confirmed through direct FA manipulations. Using 2 rating scales, student interviews, and classroom observations, school personnel developed independent hypotheses regarding the functioning of the student behavior for 20 students with emotional and behavioral disorders. The FBA results, when compared to brief FA trials and procedures, indicated some agreement among FBA measures, but little convergence with the FA trials. Reviews of functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans conducted by school personnel within the decade following the 1997 IDEA regulations showed a lack of fluency with the process. For example, Blood and Neal in 2007, in a review of FBAs and behavior intervention plans, found little correspondence between the 2. Scott and his colleagues in 2004 found less than a quarter of behavior plans were guided by an FBA. Barton and Atwood et al. Found that common rating scales used in the FBAs had inconsistencies across educator ratings. And Andrew et al. Found that when functional assessments are conducted in school settings, staff inexperience and a limited number of behavior analysts working in the schools results in functional assessments which are often missing critical features such as clear operational definitions or identification of environmental variables influencing responding. Lewis in 2015 stated that educators were able to accurately identify functional relationships between problem behavior and environmental events. Lane et al. Expanded on the approach and created a problem-solving rubric to assist educators in determining the function of problem behavior with minimal assistance. Borgmeyer et al. In 2015 demonstrated that with minimal targeted professional development, the majority of educators participating in the study were able to identify the same function of problem behavior as the experts. Safety of behavior analysis is also called into question at times. And when considering the risk, the main question to be asked is, will the child or the client be at greater risk in the analysis than that which they normally experience throughout the day? Put another way, will their problem behavior be more dangerous or intense in or outside of the analysis? Hanley encourages behavior analysts to communicate with other professionals, including medical professionals, if the problem behavior is self-injurious. Important information for this discussion is that the properly designed functional analysis will almost always result in problem behavior that is of a lower intensity than that observed outside of the analytic context. He goes on to say that riskier alternatives to conducting a functional analysis is to extend the time indefinitely by relying exclusively on descriptive assessment or to design treatments based on ambiguous outcomes associated with closed-ended, indirect, and descriptive assessments. Under these conditions, delayed and ineffective treatments are likely, resulting in a continuation of problem behavior, and that is the greatest risk of all.
There are a few reasons why functional behavior assessments are the preferred method over functional analysis. One reason is that functional analysis puts the client and behavior analyst in danger. Functional analysis manipulates variables in the environment during a test and control condition in which they aim to evoke problem behavior to determine antecedent conditions and maintaining consequences. This goes against BACB Compliance Code 2.0 Behavior Analyst Responsibility Clients, as well as the Code of Ethics to do no harm. This is especially the case for clients with extreme behavior such as aggression or self-injury, which may cause harm to themselves or others. Another reason is that functional analysis is less appealing to caregivers. Because of the nature of a functional analysis, behavior analysts must evoke the problem behavior or manipulate variables in the environment that encourage the behavior rather than discourage the behavior. This is difficult for parents or caregivers to buy into because it is requesting that they allow their child to engage in potentially harmful behavior. According to the BACB Compliance Code 3.03a, behavior analysts must get consent to perform assessment procedures. Lastly, functional analysis does not allow analysis of multiple environments. Functional analysis requires setting up a test and control condition to observe and manipulate behavior. By doing so, it does not allow behavior to be observed in a variety of settings with a variety of people. They are going through an experimental period with a test and condition variable rather than indirect versus direct observation over an extended period of time.
So the field has not reached a consensus on the minimal features of a functional behavior assessment or a functional analysis, or the requisite skill sets that school personnel need to complete the FBA and the FA within school settings. More research is needed to discern acceptable conditions under which a functional analysis is conducted by clinicians and by caregivers and educators, and the setting, whether it's controlled or natural. Indirect assessments can be a valuable first step of the behavior process. They are useful for obtaining operational definitions of problem behavior and recording the history of previously attempted interventions and to identify the context in which the problem behavior most often occurs. And that was from Andrews in 2013. The behavior analyst always begins with a review of functional behavior assessments. And the behavior assessment's already administered, and he conducts his own observation of the student and the environment. A behavioral analyst has the primary responsibility to protect the best interest of his client. To do this, he is required to make his own observation of the student and the environment to create his own baseline, regardless of the assessments already administered to the client. Bailey and Burke state that behavior analysis should see the behavior analyst should see the problem himself to get a sense of the problem and to get some sense of the variability from day to day to determine if there's any trending and if they want to understand the circumstance under which behavior occurs and get some sense of the function of the behavior. Only in doing all of this can the analyst then provide a very accurate picture, and only in doing all of this can the analyst be sure he has met his obligation to his client to operate in the best interest. Additionally, they have met their obligation for the Ethics Codes 3 and 3.1 to use the behavior analytic process techniques that are appropriate for giving current research and conducting current assessments prior to making recommendations or developing behavior change programs. A great deal of judgment goes into the process of helping clients achieve important life goals, and using functional analysis with accuracy rates as high as 93% for correctly producing the hypothesis for the cause of the behavior is a critical step in the intervention process for individuals working on behavior change.
Right. The functional analysis was created as an alternative to the FBA to be used primarily in naturalistic settings like playgrounds or classrooms, and involves more experimental methodology than the FBA does. In an FA similar to the FBA, the individual is exposed to separate treatment groups that we talked about earlier. However, unlike the FBA, the FA rapidly alternates between the treatment groups, and rates of the behavior are graphed and compared, which results in higher rates of the targeted behavior for each group and does not reliably produce a functional relationship between a behavior and its maintaining function. And that's from the Gresham article. The FBA was created as a process to identify all of the variables that could influence a behavior. Identifying all of the variables involves allowing you to develop an effective treatment plan, which will then reduce the targeted behavior and teach a more socially appropriate behavior in its place. The FBA can do so because it involves both indirect and direct observational methods and allows for multiple opportunities to observe the targeted behavior across sessions and settings. The FBA cannot do this because it is too quick of an analysis to correctly identify all of the variables that could influence a behavior, which will result in a treatment that is not as effective as it could be.
So as you saw, we have an ethical responsibility for data taking and to graph the data and to see the trends. So in conclusion, in an article by Whitman et al. 2014, they stated that functional analysis is the most adaptable and accurate methodology for evaluating the function of problem behavior in a variety of settings. Functional analysis usually exposes the client to common contingencies of reinforcement. The procedure requires multiple tests per condition. You can do one test per session. The outcome of the functional analysis provides specific guidance for the development of functional interventions. Once you know the function of the behavior, you can do one of 3 interventions. And it's also good to look at the assessments also. But so the interventions are the removal of the reinforcer or extinction, reduce the motivating operator, or replace the problem behavior through differential reinforcement. And again, that's stated in Whitman et al. And now I'm just going to show you a quick graph. So displayed in the graph, you can see the data of a functional analysis assessment and how it was performed. There are 4 conditions: attention, alone, escape, and free play. It looks like each condition was tested in 3 separate sessions. So 1 session, 2nd session, and then the 3rd. And the data definitely shows that the attention was the function of behavior. And now that we know the function of the behavior, we can create a behavior reduction plan.
Thank you everyone for joining us for our debate. That is the end. Thank you.